After 10 years of excluding me from family reunions, my parents showed up at my mansion begging for help, but my response left them silent. My name is Caroline Mercer, and I am 33 years old. For a decade, I lived as the shadow of my own family, erased from their celebrations, their stories, even their love. 10 years of silence, 10 years of absence at Thanksgiving dinners, Christmas mornings, birthdays, graduations, and weddings. My name was no longer spoken, as if I had died and they had chosen not to grieve me. Instead, they moved on, lifting my sister Lily high on a pedestal and leaving me to drown in the silence of their rejection. Yet, what they didn't know was that every cutting remark, every closed door, every night I spent alone with the ache of abandonment, became the fuel for a fire inside me. I built something from those ashes, something they never thought I was capable of. Then, one morning, when my doorbell rang, the faces that once cast me out stood trembling on the threshold of the empire they had mocked me for dreaming of. I was born in Houston, raised in a working-class home where my father, Richard, spent his days covered in grease at a plant, and my mother, Diane, worked shifts as a dental nurse. Life was modest but steady. Still, I learned early that love in my family was not unconditional. It was earned, weighed, and measured against a single golden standard, achievement that made them proud. My sister Lily was everything they wanted. Flawless grades, a cheerleader's charm, a scholarship to one of the state's top universities. At every gathering, she was their crown jewel, and I was the cautionary tale, a constant reminder of what not to be. If Lily's triumphs were toasted with champagne, my small victories were brushed aside like crumbs on a tablecloth. I tried to shine in my own way. I sketched houses while my classmates solved equations. I cut and glued scraps of wood into models while Lily danced under the bright lights of a competition. But my mother sighed at my drawings, as if they were evidence of a wasted life, and my father's voice sharpened with every reminder. What good is sketching? What future does daydreaming bring? Their dismissal became my identity, useless, impractical, a failed experiment. Even my uncles and aunts, who should have known better, laughed openly at family dinners. I can still hear one uncle's voice, heavy with condescension, saying, "If it weren't for Lily, there'd be no one in this family to be proud of." That single line carved itself into me like a scar that never healed. By 18, while Lily's acceptance into business school was celebrated with balloons and parties, my choice to study architecture at a community college was treated like rebellion. My father said I'd thrown away my future. My mother muttered about shame that night at my grandmother's house, the same house where we always gathered. No one even asked me why I'd chosen this path. No one asked what I saw in architecture, what it meant to me to finally study the thing that had given me solace since childhood. I was already written off, as if my decision were proof of the uselessness they'd always believed in. But I swallowed my hurt and buried myself in work. I took shifts at a cafe, labored on construction sites, and studied late into the night, my hands blistered from carrying bricks, my mind alive with visions of homes I would one day build. When Thanksgiving came that year, I walked home hopeful, at least for the comfort of a familiar dinner table. But the house was empty. My mother's voice on the phone was cold. "Everyone's at your grandmother's. I figured you were too busy." Later, I learned the truth. I hadn't been invited because they were ashamed of me. My empty chair was easier for them to erase than my presence was for them to endure. And so it went for the next 10 years. Every holiday, every gathering, I was excluded. Photos of smiling faces and raised glasses appeared on social media, and I watched them like an outsider peering through glass at a world I no longer belonged to. The pain of that exile could have broken me, and some nights it nearly did. But in that silence, I discovered freedom. No longer chained to their comparisons or their cold judgments, I threw myself into building something of my own. I joined with 2 classmates, and we bought a rundown house, the kind of place most people drove past without a second glance. To us, it was a blank canvas. We stripped rotted floors, replaced leaking roofs, and carved beauty out of ruins. When we sold that house for double the price, the profit was small, but the pride was immeasurable. It wasn't about the money, it was the proof that I was capable, proof that my dreams were not empty sketches. House after house, project after project, I grew stronger, more certain, more determined. I learned how to negotiate, how to manage crews, how to design, not just with aesthetics, but with heart. By 2005, I was buying land on the outskirts of Austin, seeing possibility where others only saw weeds. I built homes that breathed light, homes that made people feel safe, homes that carried my mark, and as I built houses, I built a reputation. Word spread of the young woman who risked everything, who poured herself into every project with an attention to detail and passion that set her apart. I never flaunted my success. I drove the same pickup truck, wore the same jeans, lived with the same fire that had carried me through nights of loneliness. And yet, without realizing it, I had created something they could no longer ignore. I had become someone impossible to dismiss. My face appeared in magazines. My name was spoken in Austin's real estate world, and in the silence of their absence, I discovered the loudest truth. I didn't need them to validate me. My work, my people, my chosen family, that was validation enough. But life has a cruel sense of irony. The same family who cast me out, who once laughed at my dreams, would eventually find their way back to me, not out of love or regret, but out of desperation. The morning they arrived, I had been savoring the quiet. Sunlight spilled across the marble counters of my kitchen, the air warm with the scent of freshly brewed coffee. It was one of those rare Sundays when the world felt still, when I allowed myself the luxury of sitting down with a magazine and letting my thoughts drift. The sharp chime of the doorbell shattered that peace. At first, I frowned, annoyed. No one came unannounced, but when the security camera flickered to life, my breath caught. There they were, my parents, Richard and Diane, my sister Lily, her flawless image cracked just enough for me to notice the strain in her eyes. Behind them, 2 aunts and an uncle. Faces I hadn't seen in a decade, except in photographs I'd never been invited to be part of. My chest tightened, but not from fear. The girl they had erased was long gone. What remained was me, Caroline Mercer, the woman who had built an empire from dust. I opened the door, my hand steady on the brass handle. Their eyes darted around, wide, taking in the foyer, the chandelier, the walnut floors. Lily's boyfriend shifted uncomfortably beside her, adjusting his tie as though it could cover the awkwardness hanging in the air. My father forced a smile, his voice stumbling over words he once used with ease. My mother clutched her purse to her chest like a lifeline. "Come in," I said, my tone calm, detached. They stepped inside, and the silence between us was deafening. The living room opened wide, glass walls framing the garden and the infinity pool shimmering beyond. I saw their expressions flicker from awe to unease. For a moment I almost felt pity, but then memory rushed back. The years of exclusion, the holidays I spent alone, the sting of my father's voice labeling me a failed experiment. That pity hardened into steel. I poured them coffee, set a tray of pastries on the table, and waited. Small talk floated awkwardly in the air, the drive down, the weather, comments on the furniture, but I could feel it, the heaviness of words unsaid, the real reason for their visit pressing at the edges. It was my mother who finally cracked. She set her cup down, eyes glistening with forced sentiment. "Caroline," she began, "we know it's been a long time, but families should come together when times are hard. Lily, she's going through a divorce. It's been difficult. Legal fees, settlements." Her voice trailed off, replaced by a silence weighted with expectation. I stayed still, my hands folded in my lap. Lily sat rigid, her gaze fixed on the floor, the flawless sister, now diminished by sleepless nights and the collapse of her perfect life. My father leaned in then, his tone clipped but deliberate. "This could be an investment, Caroline. You've built something solid. If you help the family now, it stabilizes everyone. It could even benefit your company long term. Think of it as contributing to the family legacy." His words dripped with the same authority he used to wield over me, but I could see it in his eyes, desperation, thinly veiled. I let the silence stretch. The irony was almost too much to bear. 10 years of being erased, only for them to stand here in my home, asking for salvation. My mother's anxious gaze, my father's brittle mask of control, Lily's silence. It was all a performance, one I had no interest in playing along with. When I finally spoke, My voice was calm, measured, but edged with steel. So, after 10 years, the only connection left between us is the balance in my bank account. The room froze. No one met my eyes. My father shifted, his jaw tightening. My mother blinked rapidly, lips pressed thin. Lily's fists clenched in her lap, her shoulders taut with pride she couldn't swallow. I leaned back, the words tumbling out of me, not with anger but with clarity, sharp as glass. In those 10 years, did anyone call? Did anyone ask how I was doing? If I needed help? Did anyone invite me to a single Thanksgiving, Christmas, or birthday? Tell me, because I can't seem to remember. Their silence was my answer. The shame on their faces, the way their gazes skittered away. It was confirmation of what I had known all along. I could have left it there, but the weight of years pressed forward, demanding to be spoken. When Lily got married, the whole family celebrated, photos plastered on social media, while I sat alone in a tiny apartment, not even knowing it was happening. When Mom had heart surgery, I drove 4 hours to the hospital, envelope of money in hand, flowers in my arms, and what did I hear at the reception desk? That I wasn't family enough to be let in. I sat in a hallway for hours until they allowed me 5 minutes when she was unconscious. I left the money behind and it vanished without acknowledgement. No thanks, not even a word. I paused, watching the color drain from their faces. And when Lily's son applied for college, I quietly transferred money to help with tuition. It was sent back with a message. We don't need it. Not didn't need it. Didn't want it from me, from the failed experiment. My voice trembled then, not with weakness but with the weight of all the years I had carried that pain. The silence grew suffocating. My father coughed, staring at his cup as though it held answers. My mother's eyes brimmed with tears. Lily remained frozen, her nails digging into her palms. The shame in the room was thick enough to choke on, but still, I wasn't finished. I drew a slow breath, letting the fury that once would have broken me rise now as clarity. My gaze locked on my father, the man who had laughed at my dreams, who had called me a failed experiment in front of a room full of relatives. You came here today to speak of family, I said evenly, but where was that family when I needed it most? When I was working 3 jobs to pay for school, did anyone bring me a glass of water? When I was carrying bricks and bleeding through my gloves, did anyone offer a word of encouragement? When I bet everything on a loan to start a business, did anyone believe in me? Or did you all dismiss it as a foolish whim? The words cut through the room like blades, slicing into the silence they thought could protect them. My mother lowered her eyes, shame written in the trembling of her hands. My father shifted again, struggling to hold on to dignity that was crumbling beneath the weight of truth. Lily stayed stiff, pride choking her into silence, her lips pressed so tightly they turned white. And then, unexpectedly, a voice rose. It wasn't theirs. It came from the stranger in the room, Lily's boyfriend. He straightened in his chair, his tie perfectly knotted, his tone laced with arrogance. Caroline, he said, I don't understand why you're being so harsh. Family is family. If you have money, it's your obligation to help. That's not a choice, it's a duty. For a heartbeat, I stared at him, startled into silence. Then I almost laughed outright at the absurdity. A man who had never seen me scrub floors until my knuckles bled, who had never watched me break under the weight of exclusion, dared to lecture me about obligation. My lips curled into a bitter smile, and then the laugh came. Sharp, cutting, echoing through the elegant room until every face flushed with discomfort. When the laughter faded, I leaned forward, my voice low but clear. You want to speak about obligation? Let me show you what obligation looks like. I reached for the tablet resting on the side table, the one I kept for business reports. With a few taps, the screen lit up with numbers. My company's financial statements, year after year of multi-million-dollar revenue, steady growth, profits reinvested into projects that had reshaped parts of Austin's suburbs. I turned the screen toward them. This is what I built with my own hands, without a single dollar from this family, without a single word of support. I swiped again, opening another folder. Photos filled the screen. A ribbon-cutting ceremony at a children's hospital I had helped rebuild, thank you letters from doctors, photos of children smiling in new treatment rooms. This is where I put my money. Into hospitals for sick kids who had nowhere else to turn. into hope for parents who thought they had none. I let the images linger in the silence before swiping once more. This time, it was students, young men and women in trade uniforms, holding certificates, their faces glowing with pride. I created scholarships for kids who wanted to work but couldn't afford tools, books, or tuition. I gave them boots, equipment, and a chance. Many of them work for me now. They didn't come asking for handouts. They came ready to work. That is who I help. That is where my obligation lies, to those who respect effort, not to those who discarded me until they needed a check. I lifted my eyes, meeting each of theirs in turn, letting the weight of the words settle. Family isn't blood. Family is how you treat each other. And how did you treat me? You cut me out of weddings, erased me from holidays, turned me away from hospital doors. You rejected me even when I tried to help. If that's what you call family, then I want no part of it. The room hung heavy with the finality of my words. My mother's eyes brimmed, her lips trembling as though to form an apology she couldn't speak. My father looked away, his shoulders sagging beneath the collapse of authority he once wore like armor. Lily's gaze dropped to the floor, shame twisting her proud features into something fragile, and the boyfriend, who had spoken so boldly, now sat stiff, his jaw clenched, his eyes darting anywhere but mine. I leaned back, the calm in me startling even myself. I don't need apologies. I don't need explanations. What I needed was a family when I was young, and you made your choice. Now I'm making mine. The words rang through the silence, final and undeniable. For the first time in 10 years, I felt no fear in their presence, no longing for their approval, only clarity. The scales had shifted, and the power they once held over me had turned to dust. I let the silence expand until it filled every corner of the room. The tick of the wall clock was the only sound breaking through. Their faces told me everything. My mother's tears shimmered but never fell. Caught between guilt and pride she couldn't release. My father, once a man whose word in our house was law, now sat hunched forward, his palms pressed to his knees as though he were bracing against an invisible weight. Lily, the sister who had been their jewel, could barely lift her eyes, her hands twisted in her lap, her carefully painted nails digging into her skin. And the boyfriend, so quick to speak before, stared at the floor like a schoolboy caught in a lie. I rose from my seat slowly, the scrape of the chair legs against the floor punctuating the finality of what had just been spoken. My steps toward the door echoed against the walnut floors, each one heavy with all the years I had carried the burden of being unwanted. My hand found the brass handle, polished and cold, and I turned it with deliberate slowness. Light poured in, the harsh Texas sun flooding the room as if to expose the truths they had tried for years to bury. I looked back at them, standing in my living room, surrounded by symbols of everything they told me I'd never achieve. My voice was steady, stripped of anger now, but heavy with resolve. This is my home, not a rescue bank, not a sanctuary for people who only remembered me once they needed something. If you came here for money, you've knocked on the wrong door. The words landed like a gavel, final and absolute. My mother's lips trembled, her hand lifting as if to reach for me, but I didn't move. My father cleared his throat, searching for words that never came. Lily opened her mouth, perhaps to plead, perhaps to justify, but the sound died before it could form. One by one they rose to their feet, shame written across every gesture. The half-empty coffee cup sat abandoned, steam still curling upward into the heavy silence. As they moved toward the door, my mother paused at the threshold, her eyes glistening, her voice shaking. Caroline, no matter what, we are still a family. You can't deny that. I looked at her, and for a brief second I saw it all. The little girl inside me holding up drawings, only to be met with sighs, the teenager standing alone while others toasted my sister, the young woman turned away at a hospital desk. All those memories condensed into a sharp ache that pressed against my ribs. I drew a breath and answered, each word carved clean and precise. A family doesn't cast out one of their own for a decade and come back only for money. A family doesn't erase you from every memory and then knock on your door when their pride collapses. If that's your definition of family, then I'm no longer part of it. Her tears finally fell then, streaking down her face. My father gave a faint nod, half in defeat, half in acknowledgement of the truth he could not erase. Lily turned quickly, her face tight with humiliation, her boyfriend tugging her arm to hurry her along. My aunts and uncle followed in silence, not daring to meet my gaze. At last, only my parents lingered. My mother's lips moved as though to form another plea, but no sound came. My father shifted, his jaw working, but he said nothing. I held the door wide, my voice low, firm, exhausted. Go. And they did. They stepped into the blazing sun, their shadows stretching long across the driveway, their footsteps heavy with the weight of everything unsaid. I closed the door behind them, the sharp click echoing like the final punctuation at the end of a chapter that had defined too much of my life. I leaned against it for a moment, eyes closed, breathing deeply, and for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't known I was searching for. Lightness, not victory, not revenge, just release. The rumble of their car engines faded down the long private road, until there was only silence again. I walked back through the stillness of my home, past the untouched pastries, the coffee cups left behind, the sunlight spilling across the leather sofa. Everything around me remained intact, solid, just as I was now. They had left carrying nothing but their shame, and I stayed rooted in the strength I had built for myself. That evening, I didn't sit alone. I drove into Austin to meet the people who had become my true family. My colleagues, my friends, the ones who had sweated beside me on construction sites, who had shared cheap takeout in unfinished kitchens, who had stayed up late perfecting blueprints. We filled a long table with food and laughter, glasses raised not in empty pride, but in genuine bond. One of them smiled and lifted a glass toward me. "Caroline," he said, "we don't care how much money you have, we just need you with us." The words pierced deeper than anything my blood family had ever said, simple, honest, and real. I smiled, nodding softly, my chest swelling with something warm and steady. This was family, the kind built not by obligation but by loyalty, presence, and love. Driving home under the glow of city lights, I realized I hadn't lost a family, I had chosen one, and sometimes, healing isn't stitching together what was broken. It's walking away from the fracture and finding where you truly belong. When I returned to my study, the blueprints for my next project lay waiting. Not another mansion, not another luxury home, but a community center, a place for children of working-class families to draw, to read, to dream without being dismissed, a place for parents to learn skills that could change their lives. As I picked up my pencil, golden lamplight spreading across the desk, I smiled. Out there, behind the gates, a door had closed forever. But here, in this room, another was opening wide toward a future I had built, toward the family I had chosen, toward freedom.